Rain drummed against the corrugated roofs of a temporary Allied compound, blurring the outline of trucks idling in the mud. The war had ended months ago, but its ghosts still marched in boots and whispers. A small convoy rolled in from the East Road. Inside, female German auxiliaries taken during the retreat. Their grey coats were soaked through. The iron insignia on their collars looked out of place under the foreign light of Saigon's humid dawn. When the trucks stopped, the women expected the worst. Rumors of revenge had traveled faster than surrender notices. A sergeant shouted orders. Rifles stayed pointed, but no one fired. Instead, a corporal handed them wool blankets, steaming tins of coffee, and said, in halting German, "Welcome to your new camp." The disbelief was almost physical. These women had been trained to see Americans as brutes. The propaganda films had shown them caricatures of greed and cruelty. Yet here, in the thick tropical air, an enemy offered comfort. That night, inside tar paper barracks, lit by a single bulb, they sat in silence. The rain never stopped. It mixed with the hiss of a stove, where an American cook stirred something that smelled too warm, too human for war. Hunger fought with pride. One woman, a former signals clerk from Hamburg, whispered, "They are feeding us like guests." Another replied, "It's a trick, always a trick." But the trick never came. Outside, a guard patrolled with a cigarette in his teeth, humming a tune they didn't know. The scent of tobacco and cooked food seeped through the walls. Somewhere, a radio crackled with Glenn Miller's trumpet, alien, jazzy, alive. Inside, boots lined up neatly by the door, water dripping from the laces, uniforms hung stiff on pegs. War had ended, but dignity was still under negotiation. At midnight, a camp light flickered out. In the brief darkness, they realized something. No one had shouted at them all day. No one had hit them. No one had even looked at them with hatred. The silence wasn't menace. It was mercy disguised as order. And by morning, that mercy would take a tangible form, a breakfast tray that held the first taste of something they had never imagined could exist. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving a pale mist hanging over the compound. The women woke to the sound of trays clattering on metal tables, the hiss of kettles, and an unexpected smell, warm, rich, almost sweet. Hunger tore through hesitation. They lined up quietly, boots muddy, hair tied back with scraps of cloth. The American cook, sleeves rolled high, pointed to steaming bowls of scrambled eggs, thick slices of toast, and mugs of black coffee. Then he placed something else on the tray, a small glass jar filled with a tan paste, glossy and strange dot. No one touched it at first. They stared at the jar like it might explode. "Medicine," one whispered. "Vitamins," said another. The label read Peter Pan peanut butter, but the words meant nothing. One guard laughed softly. "Try it," he said, tapping his spoon. "Good protein." The German women looked at each other. Protein was for soldiers, for strength, not prisoners. But curiosity won the silent vote. The first spoonful landed on a slice of bread. The woman chewed once, twice, then froze. The taste was thick, sweet, salty, nothing like the dry rations of home. Her face twisted between confusion and suspicion. "It sticks to the roof of your mouth," she muttered in German. The guard grinned. "That's how you know it's good." Around the table, others followed. Soon the room filled with the low hum of muffled laughter, hesitant, embarrassed, human. For a moment, war seemed very far away. According to U.S. Army supply logs, each POW was allotted over 3,000 calories a day, a figure unthinkable in post-war Germany, where civilians survived on half that. The women noticed the excess everywhere: stacks of butter, cartons of milk, even fresh fruit. The abundance didn't feel like generosity. It felt like proof that their enemy had been living in another century entirely. "They feed us better than our officers ever did," someone said, half in awe, half in shame. The sergeant overseeing the mess hall watched them quietly, arms crossed. He didn't speak, but he noticed the change, fear dissolving into curiosity. The same curiosity that would drive them toward the next shock waiting beyond the mess hall doors, a machine that worked without hands, humming in the laundry building like something alive. The smell lingered long after breakfast. Even hours later, traces of it clung to their fingers, roasted, oily, strange. The camp's midday heat made it stronger, almost dizzying. A few women gathered near the barracks steps, still debating what they'd eaten. "It can't be food," one insisted. "Something medicinal, perhaps to calm us." Another laughed quietly. "Then why does it taste like dessert?" That laugh, small and unfamiliar, startled even her. Inside the mess hall, an empty jar sat on the counter. The label, now torn and stained, looked like a puzzle from another world. Cartoon lettering, red and gold. To them, it wasn't just a jar. It was proof of something terrifyingly simple. Americans had invented comfort out of science, food that didn't rot, energy packed in sweetness. Even in captivity, their enemy could afford to make indulgence ordinary. When the next meal came, the women asked for the paste again. The cook chuckled, shaking his head. Medicine, huh? He teased, sliding another jar down the table. This time, there was no hesitation. The first bite drew giggles. One woman smeared it on bread like butter. Another ate it straight from the spoon. Too thick, she coughed, but too good to stop. The guard watching them smiled. That's America in a spoon, he said, not expecting them to understand. But they did, or began to. U.S. food supply reports from 1944 listed over 150 million pounds of peanut butter produced annually, enough to feed entire divisions. For these women, the number meant nothing, but the taste told its own statistic: abundance. Germany had run out of coffee, soap, and sanity by the war's end. Here, even prisoners lived in a world where sweetness came in jars. Later that night, the jar passed from hand to hand inside the barracks, like a relic. They took turns sniffing it, marveling at how something so simple could smell like peace. If this is what they eat, one said, no wonder they never feared hunger. The others nodded, silent, chewing invisible mouthfuls of memory. Outside, rain began again, same rhythm as before, but lighter somehow. Tomorrow they would be marched across the yard to a new building, where another American miracle waited to undo their certainty all over again. By the third morning, the rhythm of captivity had become unsettlingly calm. Whistles blew, gates clanked, boots formed lines, yet nothing brutal followed. The women, used to orders barked like bullets, now received them in plain English, softened by routine. The camp smelled of wet wood, soap, and boiled coffee. Beyond the barbed wire, flowers pushed through the mud, daisies planted by a guard's wife, they were told. It felt wrong to find beauty inside a fence. They worked in silence at first, sorting linens, mending uniforms. But every corner of the camp defied what they had imagined. Guards repaired roofs instead of tearing them down. Officers shared cigarettes after duty. One even brought an accordion, playing in the shade of a mess tent. The contradictions stacked like the crates of supplies arriving daily, so many that disbelief began to lose its footing. Official Allied reports from 1945 recorded 511 main POW camps across the United States. Most followed Geneva standards so strictly that prisoners gained weight instead of losing it. These facts were invisible to the women, but they felt the evidence. Steady meals, medical checks, and polite boredom replacing terror. One prisoner muttered, "We are enemies living in their order." Another answered, "Maybe we're inside the reason we lost." They noticed details now: guards shaving every morning, boots polished, schedules precise. The efficiency wasn't for cruelty. It was habit, a kind of national rhythm. They organize even kindness. One woman observed, half in respect, half in despair. When an American sergeant saw them scrubbing laundry by hand, he frowned. No, not like that," he said, pointing toward a nearby shed. Inside that shed, a metallic whir pulsed like something alive. The women followed the sound, wary eyes wide. Steam curled from a pipe, water gushed, and the room filled with a rhythmic hum. A large white drum spun by itself, shaking the floor. The sergeant smiled, folded his arms and said, "Machine does it for you." The women froze. This was no rumor, no propaganda trick. It was the future rotating right in front of them. They exchanged glances, the kind that carried both defeat and wonder, because tomorrow they would step closer to that machine, to touch what felt like sorcery, made of steel and water. The next morning, the women lined up again outside the laundry shed. The air smelled of soap and metal. Inside, that strange drum kept spinning, splashing water in perfect rhythm. A corporal flicked a switch, and the machine groaned to life, a low hum that grew into a roar. The women flinched. "It moves without hands," one whispered. "It's possessed," another muttered, half afraid, half amused. The guard laughed quietly, proud. "Electric motor," he said, tapping the side. "Does the work for you." Steam rose around them, curling against the rafters. They watched clothes whirl inside the drum sheets, towels, even uniforms washed by invisible power. One woman, a former nurse from Cologne, pressed her palm against the cool steel, feeling the vibration. "It's faster than 10 of us," she said softly, "and it doesn't get tired." For the first time since capture, their pride flickered, not from humiliation, but from comparison. Before the war, Germany had built rockets and jet planes. They called themselves masters of science. Yet here, in a prison camp, thousands of miles from home, they were seeing something smaller, humbler, yet somehow greater. A machine made for convenience, not conquest. Reports from 1945 estimated that over 50% of American households already owned powered washing machines. Technology wasn't locked in laboratories. It was inside homes, democratized and humming quietly across the nation. That the realization cut deep. Their officers had preached sacrifice, iron discipline, scarcity as virtue. America had built comfort and turned it into strength. One woman said under her breath, "We build weapons to destroy life. They build machines to save time." The others nodded, wordless, watching the water drain from the hose like proof of another civilization's logic. The sergeant, seeing their faces, only smiled. "Wait till you see a refrigerator," he joked, closing the switch. The hum slowed, the water settled, and the machine exhaled a final puff of steam, as if mocking them gently. When they stepped outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the barbed wire until it glittered like silver thread. The same truck that had delivered the machine now rumbled back into view, loaded with supplies. Crates stamped with Liberty Ship's supply division. None of them knew that inside those boxes lay the next revelation, the scale of America's industrial power. By midday, the truck's engine growled again, backing toward the loading dock behind the kitchen. The crates were taller than the women who unloaded them, stamped in bold black ink, property of U.S. Army. Quartermaster Corps, each lid cracked open under the crowbar's pull. Inside, rows of canned beef, boxes of soap, tins of powdered milk, tools, blankets, even magazines. It felt less like a supply drop and more like an invasion of abundance. A corporal leaned against the truck, smoking. "Comes every week," he said casually. The words hit harder than any shout could. Every week, the women exchanged glances. In Germany, trains were ghosts by 1945, rails bombed, factories silent. Yet here, halfway across the world, supplies flowed like blood through veins that never clotted. The camp commander later mentioned that the shipments arrived through Liberty ships, those floating factories the Americans had churned out faster than anyone could sink them. The statistics, if they had known them, were staggering. Over 2,700 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945, each capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. One Allied historian later called it the production miracle that ended the war before the fighting did. For the women watching the convoy unload, the meaning wasn't abstract. It was physical, undeniable. Metal barrels stacked like towers, wooden crates with typed inventory cards, oil drums gleaming in sunlight. Trucks kept coming, each one identical, tires spotless, engines purring. The noise filled the air, not chaos, but rhythm. Industry turned into choreography. One woman muttered, "They don't fight with fury, they fight with factories." Another replied, "And factories don't sleep." That realization settled like dust over their boots. The shock of peanut butter had been personal. This was systemic. They weren't just prisoners of war, they were witnesses to a civilization running on endless fuel. A guard tossed them a loaf of white bread, joking, "Breakfast for tomorrow." The softness startled them again. They passed it hand to hand, pressing their thumbs into its crust, as if testing the reality of it. Behind them, another truck door slammed shut, echoing across the yard. The sound of engines faded slowly, replaced by something else. The faint scent of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Tomorrow's meal was already rising, warm and impossible, just beyond the barbed wire. The scent of baking drifted across the yard before dawn. It was unlike anything the women had known, soft, sweet, almost floral. They followed the smell instinctively, like children chasing music. Inside the camp kitchen, a baker in rolled-up sleeves worked beside an enormous oven, its metal door glowing orange. Rows of loaves cooled on racks, steam rising in gentle ribbons. One of the women leaned closer, amazed that the bread bent under her fingers. In Germany, wartime loaves had been dense and grey, cut from flour stretched with sawdust or ground peas. This bread was pale, tender, yielding. She tore off a corner, hesitated, then tasted. The crust melted instead of crumbling. "It's like eating clouds," she whispered, not sure whether to smile or weep. The American cook grinned when he heard. "That's victory bread," he said. "No ration lines here." According to wartime reports, U.S. bakeries produced nearly 20 million loaves a week for both soldiers and civilians. In the camps, the same supply chain fed prisoners, almost identically to the men guarding them, a fact that quietly shocked even the guards themselves. The women sat on benches, passing the loaves carefully, tearing each piece with quiet reverence. For years, food had been a punishment, not a comfort. They had eaten standing up, rushed, under orders. Now, the act of eating became ceremony. One woman murmured, "We thought softness meant weakness." Another answered, "No, it means they could afford gentleness." They noticed everything: the shine of the butter, the steady hum of the electric mixer, the ease with which the Americans laughed while they worked. Each detail chipped away at the myth they'd been fed, that decadence made enemies fragile. Instead, abundance seemed to make them calmer, stronger, immune to despair. When the women finished, they wrapped the last slice in a napkin and tucked it away like a relic. Outside, the camp quieted under the afternoon sun. In the distance, trucks rattled toward the horizon, carrying more crates, more evidence of this impossible plenty. That night, as the women lay in their bunks, one whispered into the dark, "If bread can be this soft, maybe mercy can be too." None replied, but the silence carried agreement. And Mercy, it turned out, would arrive the next day wearing a medic's armband and carrying a first aid kit. The afternoon sun turned the yard into a haze of dust and heat. Work assignments rotated daily, and that day the women were clearing debris near the old barracks wall. One of them, a nurse named Greta from Bremen, stumbled on a loose plank and gashed her leg against a nail. Blood darkened the khaki fabric instantly. She tried to hide it, instinctively bracing for punishment. In her world, weakness had never been forgiven. But before she could limp away, a shadow fell across her. It was an American medic, sleeves rolled, stethoscope around his neck, face unreadable. "Sit," he said firmly. Greta froze. The others watched in silence as he tore open a bandage packet, cleaning the wound with practiced care. No scolding, no sneer, just precision and calm. "You'll be fine," he added quietly, wrapping the gauze with gentle fingers. She blinked, half expecting mockery, half expecting nothing at all. Later she would write, "He treated me better than my own officer ever did." According to Red Cross reports, Allied POW camps maintained full medical parity, with doctors and nurses visiting weekly. Even minor injuries were logged and treated. For prisoners who came from a culture of scarcity and severity, this care bordered on the surreal. It dismantled something deeper than ideology. It challenged identity itself. The women gathered around Greta afterward, touching the clean white dressing as if to confirm it was real. One muttered, "They healed the enemy." What kind of enemy does that? No one answered. The question hung in the humid air, heavy as confession. That night, the barracks buzzed with whispers. The medic's act spread faster than rumor. Some refused to believe it. Others wanted to. A few even smiled for the first time since capture. "Maybe he did it because rules say so," one argued. Another replied softly, "Or maybe because decency needs no orders." The next morning, when the camp loudspeaker crackled for roll call, the women noticed the medic again, this time walking beside the American commander, clipboard in hand. He looked up briefly, caught Greta's eye, and nodded. She returned the gesture, a silent truce between two exhausted nations. Beyond the fence, the clang of a typewriter echoed from the command post. Papers rustled, envelopes stamped. Letters were being approved, words ready to travel home. The sound of typing became the camp's new heartbeat. From dawn to dusk, the clatter of a typewriter echoed from the command hut, rhythmic, steady, impossible to ignore. For days, rumors spread among the women. Letters were being allowed. Most dismissed it as false hope. But that morning, the interpreter called their names, one by one, and handed out lined paper, envelopes, and dull pencils. Greta stared at hers for a long time. The paper felt too clean, too light. The instructions were simple. No politics, no troop positions, no complaints. Every word would be censored. Yet the permission alone felt revolutionary. They had expected interrogation, not correspondence. The guard supervising the process, a soft-spoken corporal from Ohio, explained that over 1.4 million POW letters had already left American camps. "Everyone writes home," he said. Even the enemy's mother deserves to know she's alive. That line silenced the room. For the first time, the women saw empathy written into regulation. They began slowly, sentences trembling into existence. Dear mother, my dearest Lord, I am alive. Some wept as they wrote, staining the pages with quiet relief. Greta hesitated, then added a line the censor might cut anyway. The Americans treat us fairly, better than we expected. She folded it carefully, sealing memory into paper. Outside, the camp felt strangely peaceful. A few guards smoked in the shade, watching as the women handed their envelopes to the interpreter. There was no suspicion, no condescension, just a silent transaction of humanity. The mail truck arrived with its rear doors open, full of sacks already marked for New York dispatch. As it drove away, the prisoners followed its path with their eyes until the dust settled back into stillness. That night, Greta sat near the barracks window, imagining her mother opening the letter months later. She pictured her kitchen back in Bremen, maybe cold and dark, but lit for a moment by those words, I am safe. In that imagined moment, captivity felt like connection. Across the yard, the radio in the guard post clicked on static, filling the air before a soft tune emerged, a voice singing about blue skies and better days. The melody drifted through the wire, crossing languages with ease. Tomorrow, it would become more than background noise. It would become forgiveness set to music. It started as background noise, faint guitar strums from the guard post, too distant to matter. But that evening, as the women gathered near the fence for roll call, the song grew louder. A man's voice carried through the humid air, smooth and low, singing words they barely understood. Blue skies, smiling at me. The sound wove through the camp like smoke. Greta looked up, her bandaged leg propped on a crate. Around her, others froze mid-motion, caught between curiosity and disbelief. They're singing, one asked softly. A guard near the gate grinned. Yeah, he said, band practice. You like music? The question felt absurd. Back home, music had belonged to parades, propaganda, orders shouted in rhythm. Here, it floated free, a luxury, not a weapon. By 1945, the U.S. Army's Special Services Division had issued over 150,000 instruments across bases and POW facilities. Guitars, harmonicas, even pianos were shipped to camps, part morale, part mercy. To the women hearing this for the first time, it sounded like another world bleeding through the wire. One of the guards tapped the fence with his boot in rhythm. Come on, he teased. You must know the tune. Greta shook her head but couldn't help smiling. Another guard joined in with a harmonica, the metallic notes catching the dusk. For a moment, the camp wasn't divided by war but by melody. Even the lieutenant in charge let it play. Later, inside the barracks, someone hummed the same tune under her breath. Others joined quietly at first, then louder, uncertain but sincere. No lyrics, just sound. It wasn't forgiveness spoken, but forgiveness felt. One woman, staring at a letter on the table, said, if they can sing after killing so many, maybe singing is how they live with it. Greta answered softly, maybe it's how they move on. The two sat in silence, the harmonica faint in the distance. When the last note faded, night filled the gap. The guards extinguished lanterns. The compound sank into quiet, but that sound, fragile, human, unguarded, stayed with them. It was more than a song. It was the first signal that this captivity was teaching them something their armies never had. Tomorrow would bring change again, not in sound, but in movement. Orders had arrived. Transfers were coming. Morning came with a sharp whistle and the crack of a clipboard closing. The camp's routine.com, predictable, almost comforting, suddenly fractured. Guards moved faster, trucks idled at the gate, and names echoed across the yard. Pack up, shouted the interpreter. Transfer list posted. The women froze. Transfers were feared like punishments. In whispers, they imagined distant camps, harsher treatment, maybe even repatriation to uncertain fates. Greta's stomach tightened as her name appeared halfway down the list. She pressed her hand to it, tracing the letters as if contact could change the order. The American lieutenant in charge explained through the interpreter, new camp, same country, different work assignments. His voice was calm, but the message hit like a blow. The women gathered their belongings, a blanket, a tin cup, a letter, a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. The same trucks that had brought crates of food now waited to carry people. Official reports Note that 372,000 Axis POWs were repatriated between 1946 and 1947, but many first endured transfers between regional camps. For the prisoners, each move felt like exile inside exile. The women climbed aboard. The engines rumbled, drowning out every thought except fear. As the convoy rolled out, the camp behind them shrank into memory. The bread, the music, the peanut butter jar, all swallowed by dust. Through the barred windows, Greta saw the American medic standing near the gate. He raised a hand in farewell. It wasn't official protocol, but no one stopped him. She lifted her fingers in return, small, hesitant, almost invisible. Inside the truck, silence pressed hard. One woman clutched her letter home, another whispered a prayer. The interpreter, seated near the driver, murmured, "You are not being punished. It is only relocation." But relocation had been the word used for so many darker journeys. No one dared believe it meant safety. Hours passed. The landscape blurred: pine forests, empty fields, the occasional farmhouse untouched by war. Then the convoy slowed, brakes hissing. A sign by the road read simply, "Camp Ashford, Labor Division." The driver called out, "Welcome to your new home." As the gates opened, the first thing they saw wasn't barbed wire, but children waving from a nearby fence. Confusion flickered through every tired face. Civilians here. The next shock wasn't fear this time. It was disbelief at kindness. The trucks rolled past the camp gates and down a narrow country road. On both sides stretched neat rows of cornfields, telephone poles, and wooden barns, an America the women had only seen in propaganda posters labeled decadent. Except this wasn't decadence. It was order, abundance, peace. When the convoy stopped near a small town, the first thing they noticed was the smell: coffee, gasoline, and something sweet baking in a shop nearby. Then came the sound: laughter. Real, unguarded laughter. Civilians lined the sidewalks, waving as if greeting visitors, not prisoners. Children ran alongside the trucks, pointing, shouting words they didn't understand. An old man tipped his hat. Someone tossed an apple into the open back of a truck. Greta caught it instinctively. It was red, perfect, unbruised. She turned it over in her hands, as if it were a piece of jewelry. The others stared, unsure whether to eat or hide it. The interpreter smiled faintly. "They're not mocking you," he said. "They're curious. You're the first Germans they've seen." According to US records, more than 425,000 POAs were housed across 46 states, often near farming towns where locals interacted freely with them. In many places, the shock wasn't hostility, it was fascination. The enemy had faces now, not symbols. The trucks parked near a grain silo converted into temporary housing. Local farmers stood nearby, hats in hand, ready to meet the new workers who would help harvest before winter. The women stepped down carefully, expecting stares, insults, maybe stones. Instead, a woman in a polka-dot dress approached, carrying a basket. "Welcome," she said, her accent thick but kind. She held out small loaves of bread wrapped in paper. For a moment, the war collapsed into something unbearably simple. One woman feeding another. Greta hesitated, then accepted the loaf. Its warmth bled through the wrapping, grounding her in the present. Around her, others did the same, exchanging awkward smiles with strangers. The officer in charge barked an order: "Form up." But the spell lingered. The civilians didn't move away. They waved again, still smiling. One child held up a lunchbox, eyes bright with curiosity. Inside was something familiar now, a sandwich spread thick with peanut butter. Tomorrow, that small gesture would break the last wall between enemy and human. The child couldn't have been more than 7. Freckles, patched overalls, scuffed shoes, an ordinary face from an extraordinary country. He stood by the fence that marked the camp boundary, clutching his lunchbox like a treasure chest. Inside, 2 triangles of white bread pressed together, edges soft and shiny with something golden dot. Greta spotted him first. The boy waved, nervous but smiling, then lifted the sandwich toward the wire. The guard nearby hesitated, then shrugged. "Go on," he said. Greta stepped forward slowly, every eye on her. She reached through the gap, took the sandwich carefully, and whispered a thank you she knew he wouldn't understand. The boy grinned, then ran off, his laughter echoing down the dirt road. She stared at the sandwich for a long time before taking a bite. The taste hit her like déjà vu, sweet, salty, thick. The same paste she'd once called medicine, only this time it carried no confusion, no resistance. It was peace made edible. Around her, the others gathered, curious, each taking a small piece until only crumbs remained. Reports from 1945 noted that peanut butter appeared in 80% of American school lunches, a symbol of post-war plenty. For these women, it was more than food. It was proof that childhood here meant safety, not propaganda or hunger drills. They chewed slowly, as if memorizing the flavor of innocence. One prisoner said softly, "It tastes happy." The words hung awkwardly in the air, almost shameful to admit. Greta nodded. "It's mercy," she said, "spread between bread." The women laughed quietly at the strange poetry of it, then fell silent again. For the first time, they didn't feel like prisoners. They felt like witnesses to another world's normal. Later that night, as lamps dimmed, Greta sat by the small window of her bunkhouse, looking toward the same road where the boy had stood. She wondered if he'd told his parents about the enemy lady who smiled back. Maybe he hadn't thought about her at all. Maybe that was the real mercy. In the distance, a train whistle called through the fields. Soon they would be moved again, homeward, perhaps. But the memory of that sandwich, warm and absurdly kind, would follow them across every border. Years later, Greta still remembered the sound of that boy's laughter. It came back to her sometimes, not as guilt, not even as nostalgia, but as something gentler. She was an old woman now, living quietly in Bremen, the war reduced to photographs and fading edges of memory. On a small shelf in her kitchen sat an American souvenir sent decades earlier by a friend. A glass jar with a red label, peanut butter, the same name, the same smell. Every time she opened it, she saw the fence, the child, the sun on the road. In post-war interviews, historians found similar stories repeated by thousands of former German POWs. Nearly 60% described their treatment in US camps as humane, even transformative. Some wrote that the smallest acts, a blanket, a song, a taste of food, had shaken their hatred more than any battlefield defeat. Greta understood this completely. For her, one spoonful of peanut butter had undone years of certainty built on lies. Sometimes, when visitors asked about her time in America, she smiled faintly and said, "They won because they had more than weapons. They had warmth." Then she'd laugh, embarrassed by her own sentiment, and add, "and washing machines." The past never vanished. It softened. The faces of the guards blurred into kindness, the fences into structure, the fear into learning. What had begun as humiliation turned into education about power, compassion, and the strange dignity of being treated better than one deserves. On her table lay the old letter she had once written in that camp. The paper had yellowed, the ink nearly vanished, but the words still whispered when she touched them. "I am safe." It was the truest thing she had ever written. As the afternoon light filled her kitchen, she made herself a sandwich, soft white bread, thick peanut butter, no fear. She took a slow bite, eyes half closed, letting the past replay quietly. Outside, children's voices floated up from the street, bright and ordinary, the same sound that had reached her across the barbed wire in another lifetime. History had buried its numbers, its battles, its medals, but one memory endured, not of surrender or defeat, but of the first taste of mercy disguised as food.